Well, my name is Amancio, and I'm doing my refutation speech on Unmanned Drones by Paul Lee. His claim was unmanned drone airstrikes do more harm to innocent civilians than to designated targets. And he has three secondary claims. The first claim is civilians casualties far outweigh dangerous suspected targets. At least 132 people have been killed and 38 suspected U.S. missile strikes just within Pakistan since August. Here I went to dictionary.com by Fairflex. War is defined a state of open, armed, often prolonged conflict carried out between nations, states, or parties. In a war, there's no pardon. There's no pardons in war. A war is an all-out battle for victory. The result of a war is one being victorious while the other is being defeated by any means necessary. In a war, one opponent is trying to win the other, to have the opponent surrender and give up. The only error in the war would be to harm your own soldiers or your civilians. His second claim was thousands of people live in fear due to unforeseen strikes around common civilian areas. Written by Craig Wilcock of the Washington Post, published in June 20th, 2014. Commercial drone strikes are to become widespread reality in the United States starting next year under 2012 law passed by Congress. Drone flights by law enforcement agencies and the military, which already occur in limited bases, are projected to surge. When the nation, states, or parties are in a war, fear is imposed to everyone who is physically as well as emotionally involved. Fear is a main factor in a war which gives you the leverage in winning. If one party can inflict fear in opponents, the better the chance of that party winning the war. Civilians are in the territory of the war. To avoid unforeseen strikes around common civilian areas, eliminate your government. They are the ones who are responsible, or at least have say-so in the situation you're in. His third secondary claim was the U.S. policies regarding secret drone strikes are deliriously flawed, which leads to abnormal amounts of civilian casualties. According to TACPIDO.com, derived from official and multiple resources, states that combat losses are difficult to fully ascertain in many cases. Some countries kept excellent records and some none at all. Some countries include people who died of combat wounds years after they were inflicted, some not counted them at all. Civilian casualties are expected in the war. The extent of the amount of casualties can be reduced or eliminated by your government. Your government has power to surrender, which would reduce casualties, or to fight on inflicting even more casualties. Secret drone strikes that result in civilian casualties is flawed to an abnormal amount. A war without casualties wouldn't be a war. A war resulting in your opponent having a greater amount of casualties than you is considered a winning strategy regarding to war. To conclude, I have defined war, explained how fear is a big part of war and the main factors of winning a war, and how civilian casualties is going to happen in a war. Solution, reject war. Thank you.
All right, organizationally, everything's easy to follow. You've got the proposition labeled, and you get to the secondary claims pretty clearly. On your first point, when you're talking about the definition of war, I'm not exactly sure where this is going, but then I guess the general response that you're making here is that there are always casualties in war, and they're unavoidable, and it's just one of those things that happens. The goal of war is victory, and we can't have victory without having some of those casualties. Okay, so I understand that. I do think you need to demonstrate, though, that the drone strikes are, in fact, producing the victories that we're looking for, and they're producing the casualties in the enemy that we want, because you and yourself said in your own argument the only errors would be if our own soldiers or civilians were killed, but that seems to be the argument that the advocate's making here, is that civilians are being killed, and that supports the advocate's point of view, not your point of view. I think what you need is some information that suggests that in the way this war is being fought, in particular, that we try to minimize civilian casualties, and that the reason that civilian casualties are high is because of the tactics that are used by the people that we are fighting against. Because typically, for instance, they hide among civilian populations, they surround themselves, they put their headquarters in schools and places like that as a way of, basically you've got unwilling or unaware hostages against attack, and that there's something unreasonable about that. Basically that the rules are being redrawn, and we have to find a strategy to address that. I think that would be the response that you need to develop there. On the second point, when you talk about the drone strike or the drone laws that are being passed by Congress, I don't know how that's supposed to be applicable. It sounds mostly like it's talking about the use of drone technology here in the United States, which doesn't really apply to the advocate's argument there. You do make a mention of fear as leverage, and I think that's an interesting idea. Has the fear of drone strikes been effective at reducing the terrorist activities in those places where these things are being used? And you kind of make a mention of one of your solutions here that should come up at the end again, and that is, if people are unhappy with that, the way to solve that problem is to eliminate the government and basically end the war that way. So the problem here is that we're not fighting a war against Pakistan, we're fighting a war in Pakistan, sometimes with Pakistan's cooperation against terrorists who are operating in Pakistan. And so it's a little bit different. It's not as if we need Pakistan to surrender. They're not our enemy in this situation, although sometimes they might provide material support for the enemy or prevent us from attacking. We are not at war with Pakistan, so I think that makes it a little bit more complicated. On the third point, when you say, when the advocates talk about U.S. policies being flawed, you again present some information here that says, that conflict losses or combat losses are hard to ascertain, and sometimes people keep track of the number, sometimes they don't. I'm going, okay, so are you attempting to diminish the significance of civilian casualties by suggesting that we don't have accurate numbers on that? I don't know. You don't make that claim, so you've presented this information but haven't really told me what it is that I'm supposed to do with this. And then you basically come back and say you've got the power to surrender the government in that situation, which, as I just explained, is not really the issue that's going on there. Can you demonstrate, for instance, your general philosophy seems to be that the goal of war is to inflict more casualties on the enemy than you suffer. So are we doing that? That would be something that would show that the drone war is working pretty well, and I don't really get any information on that. At the end you say reject war. That's the thing that I thought was a little bit confusing, because everything that you set up tells us about what the whole purpose of war is, and the way to win this war is to behave in a particular way. So it doesn't sound like you're arguing that we should reject war. It sounds like you're arguing that the other side should surrender to end the war, and I think that's the way you ought to phrase that particular claim. All right, thank you.